This is a short video on the foundations of constructing an argument. A sensible starting point then is to first think about what we mean by the word argument. In everyday language, an argument is about a disagreement. However, an argument in academic writing, philosophical thinking or critical review, an argument is not simply disagreeing with different points or something somebody said. That's a contradiction. It's an intellectual process. So how might we define it? Well, a common definition is that an argument is a collective series of statements to establish a definite proposition. We gather information, data, evidence. We put the findings of those into statements and use those to establish a definite proposition. Okay, but what do we mean by a proposition? Well, in an argument, a proposition is the part of the statement that asserts or denies something. They are the building blocks of an argument, and in this role they can function either as the premise or the conclusions. When the proposition is a premise, they're providing support or justification for the conclusion. They're the reasons given to back up the argument, and so they're often forward-looking. They are sentences that include words like therefore, evidence 1, therefore, conclusion. If the proposition is the conclusion itself, the argument is often retrospective. It works backwards. So the conclusion is the proposition because of certain premises, or this conclusion must be true because, and then the premises are the point that are being argued. Propositions come in different forms. The simplest form is singular. They can be quite specific. Dan likes dogs. Or general. Dogs wag their tail. We can combine singular to make what we call composition propositions, creating conditional propositions. For example, Dan likes dogs, provided they don't bite him. Or we can have alternative propositions. Dan is either a biomechanist or an engineer. And while it's entirely possible to be a biomechanist and an engineer, the presence of the word or in this statement tells us that only one of those is true. So even though propositions are built on evidence, we need to actually work through these to see how this evidence is being combined to reach the conclusion, to assess the validity of the argument that's being constructed. The process of reasoning through propositions is about breaking down the language that's used and the evidence that's being presented. First, to understand the point that's being made, the argument that's being presented, but secondly, to get an insight into how that is being achieved. And the use of language and the evidence that arguments are built upon is a reflection of the approach to critical thinking. When we look at critical reasoning, there are three primary forms: induction, deduction, and abduction. While there are other forms of critical reasoning, for the sake of conciseness, we're going to focus on these three primary forms. In the next few videos, we'll look at inductive thinking, deductive thinking, abductive thinking, and then how we can combine different conclusions, what we call micro-conclusions, to form the overall conclusion within a document or a rhetoric, a speech, any form of collective presentation of evidence.